Hello everybody. Now, we got a very interesting video going on today. As you can see, I'm wearing the tie, which means it is some time for some Pokemon Sleep news. Now, this isn't as much of breaking news as what I typically do, and as you can hear, I got a little bit of different music going on in the background. Typically, I like to use the Top Hollow music background for news videos because it gives more, like, intense vibes to make it like, oh, this is breaking news, everybody. But, I decided, you know what, for this event, it's an event. We got something special going on here. I'm going to run the event music. So, we got the Halloween music running in the background. But, what we're talking about today, Mimikyu. Now, Mimikyu has been announced for a while. We've known about its presence. We've known about what its skill was going to be. But it was kind of difficult before this point to kind of narrow down, is it going to be useful? Is it going to be good for the meta? Is it going to be very helpful? I was kind of hoping it'd be like, it procs X number of berries, or procs X number of helps from Pokemon, other Pokemon on the team for berries, and then basically making it more like a Dedenne of berries, that it would boost berry teams overall. However, it doesn't actually work out that way in practice. It more kind of seems to... In practice, I think this berry burst skill isn't going to be compared to, like... I think the best skill to compare it to is honestly Charge Strength S. I think this Disguise ability is a disguised version of Charge Strength S. That's just a more interesting variant. It's named differently, but it functions almost identically with the way that it works. Just with a bit added stipulations of how to get it to function necessarily. So, I didn't really discuss this. I didn't make a video about when we actually got the data mine, because usually I like to make data mine videos because I find them to be very intriguing. This data mine, however, didn't really give us much new information, other than kind of how the main skill worked, but it still was kind of difficult to discuss how that main skill was going to work, or how it was going to play into the meta, until we know its skill trigger rate. So I kind of held off on a video for that for some time. Now, if we really want to get into how this main skill works, now that I'm making a video about it, basically, the main skill, its level, so Mimikyu makes Ghost Berries equal to this first number based off its skill level, and then for each other Pokemon on the team, it makes X number of berries, the secondary number of that berry, of that Pokemon's berry type and level. That's very important for understanding how it's working, because it depends on the Pokemon's level, and some players aren't necessarily leveling their Pokemon to level 60 to get the valuable berries, because if it's an ingredient specialist and it makes enough ingredients at level 30, why put the extra candy into it when you just want it at level 30? Now, if you're running Mimikyu, it's important that you have all the Pokemon on your team leveled up, so that these bonus berries also get that bonus to boost the Mimikyu as well. So that's kind of one interesting little quirk about it, but yeah. And this secondary number is unaffected by Berry Finding S or Berry Specialty on the secondary one. So if you have a level 60 Charizard, and you have a level 60 Typhlosion with Berry Finding S, and the Charizard doesn't have Berry Finding S, if the Mimikyu procs, a level 6 main skill Mimikyu is going to get 5 Fire-type berries of level 60 value from either or. So it doesn't matter if you're running a Berry Specialist or an Ingredient Specialist, it's all about the type and the level of the Pokemon that are running alongside the Mimikyu. Which is very interesting for certain types. Like, Psychic Berry currently doesn't have a Berry Specialist, so if you run a Mimikyu alongside a Gardevoir, and I can't even think of any other Psychic types off the top of my head, like I know there's Wobbuffet, Mr. Mime, maybe Mimikyu's gonna be your Psychic type Berry Specialist. Hopefully they introduce a real Psychic type Berry Specialist before we get to that point of needing to use Mimikyu as the Psychic type Berry Specialist, but interesting quirks that can be discussed. Now, the reason why I say I think this Pokemon's main skill is less comparable to being a unique skill or being compared to something like Dedenna's skill, but for berries, is because really what it's doing, if you think about it, is proccing berries is basically proccing raw strength, similar to how Charge Strength S or Charge Strength M would work. So, but it's got the benefit of it works with favored berry. Now, interestingly, the devs actually valued this skill very highly. If you go deep into the code of how RP is calculated, every skill has a base value, and Of those skills, a lot of them that are on the skills specialists pretty much exclusively are valued at about 880 in the calculation. The legendary skill is valued at 2800. Mimikyu's skill in the code is valued at 1400, which aside from the legendary skill, is the highest value of any skill in the game. So we kind of were expecting this Mimikyu to have a relatively low proc rate. But it wasn't really given that low of a proc rate. For a help speed time of 41 minutes, 3.3% isn't terrible. In fact, if we go to the Pokedex and compare skill trigger rates, and sort by skill trigger rate here, let's just see. I haven't actually done this yet, so I don't know how the outcome's going to be. But if we look at the final evolution of just skills Pokemon, it is the worst of the non-legends, which makes sense if it's got a more valuable skill. But it's like 2.7 versus 3.3, so that does actually check out in the way that they value the skill. Previously, the highest valued skill in the game was Energy for Everyone, which is kind of sad for poor Jolteon here, who has a worse skill in the dev's eyes, yet they gave him a worse proc rate. Poor Jolteon. Anyway, that's off topic. Mimikyu. So yeah, Disguise Berry Burst. Why is it like Charge Strength M? Well, like I said, it's basically just giving raw strength to the Snorlax. You can't use it for overstacking because it itself is the one dropping the berries. It's not giving those berry drops to other Pokemon so they can overstack. So it's not useful in the case of overstacking, like some people thought it might. Because once it hits Sneaky Snacking, it's not going to be able to proc its skill anymore. So it's strictly just one Charge Strength drop, really. Now, where that comes into interesting is the comparison we need to be making is to Ampharos. Because Ampharos is currently the top of the Charge Strength Pokemon to determine how meta-relevant this thing is. So I set up a little comparison of if we're to run an Ampharos or if we're going to run the Mimikyu in a multitude of different scenarios. Now I'm going to reset the berries here because I want to talk about base first. Now, if you run an Ampharos, I just set up, this is a pretty standard meta-relevant team for someone who's been playing for a really long time, who's really going for a berry-focused strategy. I figured this is kind of what we'd be looking at. We might have ingredient specialists in here, but the idea is if we take the last Pokemon and swap it from Ampharos for a Mimikyu, what's the impact going to be? So the other Pokemon don't really matter aside from the Energy for Everyone, because I figured there's always going to be an Energy for Everyone on the team, and it's most of the time not going to have favored berry. Those are two pivotal details. Because that actually hurts the Mimikyu in the end. Unless the final one does have favored berry, because it is gaining benefits from other Pokemon's favored berries. So, Ampharos compared to Mimikyu. If we just run this team, and we have no favored berries accounted for, it's no shocker the Ampharos wins. 2.03 million versus... This says something different because I haven't plugged in, gotten rid of the favored berries yet. 2.03 million versus 1.81 million, basically. Or 2.003 versus 1.809. It's not even comparable if they have the max... And this is assuming max level main skill. However, something else the Ampharos has going for it over the Mimikyu is that Ampharos Charge Strength M goes up to level 7. As of right now, Berry Burst only goes up to level 6. And we've been promised that all main skills will eventually go to level 7. So I think it's more fair to make a comparison of a level 6 main skill on the Ampharos rather than a level 7 main skill. However, I wanted to throw it in there to just show you that in the current situation of the game, if you have the seeds to spend, it's almost always better to invest into the Ampharos. One day, however, the Mimikyu might have some grounds if we're comparing on this adjusted basis. So, if we get into the adjusted baseline of comparing them, you can see that the Ampharos still does win when there's no favored berries accounted for, with 1.887 million versus 1.809 million. But that's a decently close comparison, like, in the big scheme of things. 1.887 divided by 1.809. The Ampharos is only outperforming the Mimikyu by about 4%. We'll round up, say 5%. if we're saying that the Ampharos is 5% better than the Mimikyu, well then, helping bonus boosts a Pokemon's productivity by about 5.2%. So, just having helping bonus alone makes that sub-skill makes the Mimikyu a better option than the Ampharos. So, it's got grounds to stand on as a Pokemon that can compete with an Ampharos with the right sub-skills in nature. So, if you're still looking for a skills Pokemon that you take everywhere, the Mimikyu is a decent option, but the Mimikyu can actually outperform the Ampharos in some interesting circumstances. And that is, like I said, when we take into account Favorite Berry. First things first, if we give each one of them their Favorite Berry. So, Ampharos gets the Electric Favorite Berry, and Mimikyu gets the Ghost Favorite Berry. The Mimikyu gets significantly boosted. I don't remember if this one actually comes out in terms of the Mimikyu over the Ampharos, because the Ampharos is also getting the Electric Berry. But if you have Ghost Berry alone, the Mimikyu's way better. Because its skill's getting doubled, basically, and its berry production is getting doubled. But if we give them both their favorite berry types, the Mimikyu still comes out on top. So, Ghost Berry alone is enough to make it outcompete the Ampharos. And that is important because if you take it to Old Gold Power Plant, they're both going to have favorite berry for comparison's sake. So, I wanted to do this little comparison for that sake. Even just having Ghost Berry alone, Mimikyu will be better. However, the question is Mimikyu a good option at every island? Can you reasonably use Mimikyu at any island and have it be a better generalist than Ampharos? Because that's kind of what the Charge Strength Pokemon do well, is they are the generalists of the game. They're not going to be the best at any given island. The best at any given island is going to be one that really plays into the ingredient type of the week, or one that is a favorite berry fighting S berry Pokemon at that island. It's almost always going to outperform the skill specialist of that type. But the skill specialist is going to be strong at every single island. So you're not always going to have that ghost favorite berry for Mimikyu, because that's just Old Gold Power Plant alone. So then the question is, if you have the right arrangement of the other 3 Pokemon on your team, ignoring the Energy for Everyone Pokemon, then can the Mimikyu outperform the Ampharos? And I looked into it, and if you run Fire, Water, Grass, which is why I picked these particular ones, now you could min-max this a little bit more. Let's say you have a Meganium and a Venusaur, then your last one is a, let's say instead of Meganium and Venusaur, let's say the Feraligatr. Instead of Feraligatr, you have Feraligatr, Blastoise, and Wooper, or Quagsire. You have 3 favorite berry or 3 ones with favorite berry, and then you have a Wigglytuff for your healer. You could get all of them favorite berry off of the Mimikyu's excess procs at Cyan Beach. So, or if you go to Lapis, you could use Gardevoir as one, and then, say, have 3 Meganiums. So it's possible to get all 4 of them having favorite berry. I just figure it's going to be difficult to do, just because RNG is taken into account quite a bit as well. But if you have Fire, Water, Grass, you get 2.9 million on the Mimikyu. And if you have Fire, Water, Grass over here as well, now let's get rid of the Ghost Berry. Then it's 2.9 million as well. However, as you can see, the Ampharos is slightly worse than the Mimikyu in this circumstance. 2.92 versus 2.91, roughly. If we do that calculation again, the difference is even more marginal than before. As you can see here, it's about a 0.2%. There's not even something that's that small that I can really tell you the sub-skill's impact on that, because like I said, it was sub-skill makes up the difference before. Anything makes up the difference before. Do you check the game more often can make up that difference. So they're basically the same in this circumstance. So in my opinion, the Mimikyu passes the test of the generalist of being a comparable generalist to the Ampharos. It just takes more work to get it to those greater extents of strength than what the Ampharos can currently do. And one final thing that the Mimikyu really has going for it over the Ampharos is that it is it ultimately, being a mon that relies on a stronger skill with less procs instead of a middling skill with middling procs like the Ampharos. Oh, the music just reset. It's proccing less, which means it's going to run into less inventory issues because you're more likely to... You may be less likely to get a double proc in one night, but it's less likely that skills will be wasted because you already have a double proc stockpiled up before you collect again. So it gives you more freedom to check the app more infrequently. And then overnight, yeah, you're going to want a bigger inventory so that you're more likely to come across a double proc in the morning. Inventory is going to matter more for the Mimikyu than it's going to matter on, say, the Ampharos or even the Golduck. But it's got that advantage. It's much more difficult to use, but I think it's very, very high skill ceiling Pokemon, while also having a relatively low skill floor. I think someone could easily realize, oh, it's synergistic if I run the Mimikyu with a Meganium alongside it at Lapis. That doesn't take much thought process to put into it. It's just more, will you ever get these teams that have three favored berry Pokemon on the team? Because oftentimes your ingredient specialist isn't necessarily favored berry. So teams are going to be a lot more interesting if you are trying to build around the Mimikyu and make it as strong or more strong than the Ampharos. I really like this one, though, because unlike with the Drifloon, where my complaints about the Drifloon were that it was extra steps to get less strength, which is why I hated on it so much and why in my tier list video I ranked it so low. This, on the other hand, sure, it's extra stuff to work with. It's more difficulty than just putting an Ampharos on the team and calling it a day. But you actually are rewarded for doing so. And it's also, it scales with level as well, which is more interesting. When we get to higher levels, possibly level 100, the Mimikyu is probably going to actually completely outperform the Ampharos unless they add higher skill levels, because Mimikyu's skill is also scaling with the Pokemon level as well, which it's one of the first, if not the first Pokemon skill specialist to do that scales off the Pokemon's levels. Dedenne kind of has its strength scale with the meals levels, but Mimikyu's weird, and I like it. It's very unique. I give it 2 thumbs up. I'm personally not looking for one because I've already got decent options for generalists. I don't need a generalist role on my team. I've got my Raichu that comes with me everywhere, that even a great Mimikyu isn't going to really be competing with that much. Even if I put on this team's 2.9 million, if I was to slap on my Raichu, then it's 3.2 million. My Raichu's a much better generalist, and I used pretty good stats on those ones. I'm not interested in catching another generalist, so it's not something that I'm looking for in my account. It's too good for my Sleepers series, so I'm not really looking to hunt the Mimikyu at all. I also don't have the skill seeds to invest into it. But overall, I think it's a decent option if you want to hunt it and use it. If I was to rank it off the top of my head where I'd put it, I'd say because of how much complication there is for it, it's probably an A tier, not quite an S tier. I don't think it actually beats out the Ampharos for the generalist role, but I think it's solidly an A tier, especially since it can reach higher highs than the Ampharos when doing the right amount of work. So, if you've learned something and thought a bit more about how the Mimikyu works, have more thoughts on the Mimikyu, I love this. I think it's awesome. It gets me giddy. But yeah, if you learned a little bit, maybe leave a like, subscribe, and thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.